good evening, everybody, and a huge thank you to Audra Lynn for coming on. I've watched Audra on Roseanne's channel, and brilliant speaker, mind-blowing story. We've got the Epstein component of it, but we're going to go over all of Audra's life story and get your questions ready as well. Also, Audra is supporting the EPSTEINJustice.com, which Nick Bryant talked about the other week. So that link is in the description box. So please support that important cause. And because of the nature of what we're talking about, Audra, the police have put a restriction on my channel whereby I have to ask guests such as yourself, do you give us permission to publish your story, and do you waive your anonymity?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's go back then to what your life was like as a kid, where you grew up, and what was it like with your mom and dad?
Yeah. So I grew up in a real small rural town of Heartland, Minnesota. And that is, we were out in the country 5 miles from a town that was 288 people. So we lived really like in the middle of nowhere. I call it Bumpkin because it's like very Mayberry, you know? And yeah, so it was very interesting. Everyone knew everybody's business. Everybody knew who everyone was, which is a great thing and a bad thing, you know. Lots of rumors, lots of, you know, I was a model, so there was all those rumors in high school and jealousy and all that I dealt with. But all in all, like, it was a great upbringing. I have my parents, they're still married. They're still madly in love. And it's a great example that I've always had in my life. And I was big into showing horses, and I did really well with the horses. I did AQHA, and then I got into figure skating, and I was there's test levels, and I was one test away from Olympic, like where you could, you know, go and do nationals and Olympics and all that stuff. And so I was doing all the big jumps, and I really had like an ideal family and an ideal upbringing.
So when you're 5 miles away from the nearest town of 200 plus people,
yeah,
what do you do as a kid? Do you have to have lots of siblings to play with?
I'm an only child, so I was very lonely. And nobody wanted to drive all the way out there to like see anybody. And back then, I mean, we didn't have cell phones back then. Hard to imagine, right? And because I was in between these two towns, I had a Freeborn phone number instead of a Heartland phone number. And that made a huge difference, because with Freeborn, you could only call that town. And with Heartland, you could call like the biggest city over, which was like Albert Lee, for free. So I like calling people. I was totally out of touch with everybody, basically. Did
you have a lot of pets?
I did, yes. And I still do today. I have like a mini zoo here in Florida, but I had a lot of horses, cats, dogs. So, yeah.
So what about school then? Were there any subjects that particularly interested you, or any teachers that you liked?
Yeah, I had his name was Mr. Raggets, and he was the coolest teacher ever. And he taught history. I think he's now the principal of the school, which is really cool. And he was like laid back, and he was an ear, you know, and if I could tell any teacher, like, just be an ear for kids, because, you know, even though I didn't really have anything that, you know, was traumatic then, besides like kids picking on me, he still sat and listened to me about how people were treating me, and that meant the world to me.
Was history, did that attract you?
No, I thought it was the dumbest thing ever. I'm like, why do you want to learn about the past? You know, and now I'm such a history buff, and I do all the deep dives and really dig through history, and I find it fascinating now.
So you said you did experience some bullying. Can you recall, you know, what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, just girls being mean. I had 28 kids in my class, like total, and there's like 300 from K to 12. So it was a really, really small school, and there was only like 7 girls, and the rest were boys. And so like if any of the boys showed any interest, I think the girls got jealous. And I also was like a new kid. I think I transferred over in 9th grade. So that's a really hard time to like you know, go into a new area, even though people knew me. And so, yeah, it was very cliquey, you know, and so I was kind of the outcast and didn't have a lot of friends in school and all of that.
Yeah, I was one of the last to grow in my year group, and I was little, and the rugby players used to beat the crap out of me, and I was terrified. And I think that created a bit of a social anxiety in me as I, you know, went into my teens. Did you experience anything like that?
Yeah, I used to get thrown in lockers, you know, tipped upside down in garbage cans. So yeah, I definitely felt that.
So what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you have goals, dreams?
Yeah, well, I wanted to be an Olympic level figure skater. Like I wanted to go to the Olympics and do all that. But I had cut my Achilles tendon, and so that kind of ended that career. And with everybody kind of picking on me in school, I wanted to make something out of myself. And so I looked at modeling because that's what I had been doing since I was 15. And just kind of making a name for myself, making a name for my small hometown that I came from, and go out there and do something. And so the first opportunity, I graduated about almost a year early, and I got out of there and started my career in modeling.
And what fascinated you about that career? Was it all the glitz and the glamour that we see from Hollywood and the stars?
Yeah. I loved fashion, and I love beauty, and yeah.
Okay, so how old were you then when you entered the modeling profession?
I was 15.
15.
I wanted to start earlier, but my parents were like, we want you to have like kind of a business sense, and I had to be, you know, mature and have kind of a good head on my shoulders before my parents wanted me to get involved in that. And then they were always with me, you know, so I always felt secure, and I never had anything weird happen to me when I was young or anything like that in the modeling industry. And it was a fun time.
So how many years was it a fun time for?
I mean, it started to slow down when I was around 22. And so that's why I ended up doing Playboy. And I thought that I'd reinvent myself like Cindy Crawford had done. And her career really took off after that. And it can either kill a career or make a career. And I decided to take that chance. And so I decided to, well, I was actually in California with my girlfriends, and they made a dare for me to knock on the glass of the Playboy studios. And so I did, and took test Polaroids, and Jenny McCarthy and I are the only two to get accepted right off the bat. So that was really cool.
Wow. So what was your like excitement or nervousness like when you're doing a shoot for Playboy?
I was terrified because I came from such a modest world, you know, like where I grew up, and I knew it was going to be controversial, and I felt bad for my parents because, you know, like your reputation means everything there. And so I felt really bad, but at the same time, like I wanted to do something for me, because like I felt like I always had lived for everybody else and not for myself. And so that was my first major, like, I'm just going to do this, you know? And it was the first day that the plane started flying after 9/11. And so that was, I got on the plane. My mom was so scared and so nervous. And I went out there, and it was really an awesome, amazing experience. And I know that people, sorry.
What was the conversation like with your parents about doing this?
My mom took it really hard, and she's like, how can you disgrace the family? And my dad's like, you know, you do you. And he had his concerns. You know, everybody had their concerns. And granted, you know, like looking back, yeah, there should have been concerns. And, you know, like would I do it today? I absolutely would not do it today with the values that I have and everything like that. But when I went into it, I went into it thinking Adam and Eve, they were naked in the garden. They weren't ashamed. And it wasn't shame until Eve with the garden, with the serpent, that all of a sudden she felt ashamed of being naked and had the garments. Sorry, I'm so nervous. How do you come out?
Audra, you're just a brilliant speaker. You're answering just honestly and clearly, and all the viewers, it's just love and support for you in the chat. And viewers, Audra's not used to doing lives like this and just opening her heart and telling everybody the story. So please keep the love and support up in the chat. And if you've got questions, put them in the chat, and we will put those to Audra later on. So did you feel safe then? And you said it was a positive experience. You felt safe. You didn't feel like there was any predators had an eye on you at that point?
No. And what was so wonderful about being at the Playboy Mansion is that if you felt uncomfortable, you let security know and they would take care of it. And it didn't matter if it was Hef's like best friends or anything like that. If you felt uncomfortable, Hef would take care of it, whether it was his good friend or not. And I did see the podcast that you did with that investigative journalist. I think her last name was Summers. Do you remember?
I can't remember. There's so many interviews. I can't remember.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So it was just a few months ago. And like, I'm so supportive of investigative journalists and everything like that. But from being someone that lived at the Playboy Mansion for 2 years, like, I can tell you that there aren't tunnels. Like, how that happened with the tunnels and with the photo that Playboy published, they published it looked like there were tunnels under the mansion and everything. That was supposed to be an April Fool's joke. And so they put it in the April magazine as like a ha-ha. Well, now it's come out with all the tunnels, and they are real. There's tunnels under so many cities, and I have had calls from people being trafficked through those tunnels, and I understand all of that. But at the Playboy Mansion, it just simply didn't exist. And so I can debunk all that. There's a concrete area that you could like say is like a small tunnel, but it doesn't go anywhere else. And that's where all the lockers and all the extra condiments and everything were held. So yeah.
So how long were you working with Playboy, and what was your next career move?
So I was with Playboy for, a long time. Geez, 8 years, maybe, somewhere around there. Once you're a playmate, you're kind of always a playmate. And I lived there initially when I first went out there. Hef's like, you can't go back to Minnesota. And my parents said, hey, if you're going to do Playboy, like, you need to make a go at it, and you need to really like try and put yourself like everything into it. And so I did, and I ended up staying at the mansion for about half a year at that point. And then I moved into an apartment with a friend of mine that was a psychiatrist.
So what were the parties like then at the mansion?
They were awesome. It was like one of the best times of my life. Like, everybody was so supportive. There's a few girls, but when you put that many girls in a room together, you think it would be so catty and nasty. And it wasn't. Like, we all loved each other, and we were so supportive. And even through like the Roseanne podcast, I can't tell you how many of my Playmate sisters have reached out to me. Huh. And Hef was always supportive, and I was friends with his girlfriends, and it was really great.
So what's the craziest Playboy party story?
Well, so normally, like, security is really tight. So like, when you think about the Playboy party, and I know that there's been this like big persona about it, right? But that's not how it ends up going at the Playboy Mansion. Like, it was more of like a social gathering. And if people did hook up, like, it was usually in like a the game house, but they were even trying to make sure that the doors were locked for that. Like they didn't want that stuff going on, you know, and if you got caught, like you were out, and like you were out for good. And same with like drugs and everything else. But there was the one time that Snoop Dogg was smoking marijuana at the Playboy Mansion, and he got sick and threw up all over the bathroom. Or, I mean, sorry, not the bathroom, all over the kitchen, all over the kitchen of the Playboy Mansion. And I think I'd have to confirm this, but I'm almost positive they kicked him out of it because he wasn't supposed to have any drugs, including marijuana. So they were pretty strict there, actually. So
was there a lot of celebrities that acted up, or did they try and remain composed?
Yeah, they were pretty good.
Are you allowed to drop any names, or is it like a contractual thing that?
Oh no, I have no NDA. I'm good. So, yeah. I mean, like literally it was everybody. And I feel like I was there during such a vital time in Playboy's history. And Hef was out having fun with people again. And he had just gotten divorced from Kimberly, and the kids lived next door, and they would come over and they'd always have like family movie night. So like Hef always dedicated time to his family, and I'd watch the boys running around shooting home videos, which were the funniest videos ever. And Hef would come down and he'd be so supportive and so great. And but you know, like they talk about celebrities that just randomly would go up there all the time. Like I know Bieber got mentioned, and that's not how the Playboy Mansion worked. So it was a very secure list. You had to be on it to be able to even get up to the mansion. And he rarely had like drop-ins. The people that would be there were his like really good friends. They'd come play tennis or something like that. And that was all the people that were there. Otherwise, it was during the parties, and Hef would say hi to everybody. And then he always retired early, like around midnight. He was done with the party. He let everybody else continue until, you know, sunrise, basically.
You got a few people in the chat are just asking what were the inner workings of Playboy? You know, as a business model, how did it function?
How did it function? So there's like a lot of steps. So when I first submitted to be a Playmate, Hef signed off on me right away. But most of the girls, they have to go through. It goes to Chicago's desk. Chicago looks over everything, and then it ends up going to Hef, and Hef looks over everything to approve it. And so there's steps to everything that way. As a company, I loved working for them because they were always for the woman. Like if anybody did try to touch us or anything, like they wanted them out immediately. I remember one time this guy came walking up to me, and he was clearly intoxicated, and I was in my bunny costume, and he went to grab me. And I remember just kind of like pushing him to the side, but he ended up falling on top of the table and crashing the whole table at the party. And I thought that she was called like our bunny mother, and her name was Pat Lacey, and she was the best lady ever. And I thought she was going to be so mad at me. I thought I was in so much trouble, and she supported me, and she's like, hey, he was going to touch you. You're fine. You're good, you know? So that was
self-defense.
Nice.
Yeah. Yep. So how did you come into Epstein's orbit then?
So after I left the Playboy Mansion, that's when a lot of elite people started kind of finding me. I would go to, you know, different parties, and then I'd start meeting these businessmen that, you know, some of them were cute, and you'd think maybe I'm gonna, you know, date them or whatever. And so I was kind of in that whole like circle. And then what happened was I got an email from Maxwell, and what I later found out, and this was like a decade after all this happened, was that there was a girl that was one of Hef's girlfriends that gave out our phone numbers and our emails to predators. And it wasn't just Maxwell. There were other predators that they had given information out to as well. And so I got an email, and it was basically like, I can help hook you up with all these people that are really great in the industry and in the business. And so I thought, I read her email and I just kind of like put it off to the side. And it was a couple months later that she gave me a phone call and said, hey, like, this is a great opportunity. There's this guy here from New York. He's really great. Like, he knows all the producers. He knows absolutely everyone in town. If he likes you, you're going to go so far. And, you know, I really wanted to make a career in the entertainment industry.
So what happened next?
So then I went to this hotel, and this hotel had like, there were like bungalows. And so there was like a meeting area. There was a like sitting area. And so like when I walked in, like I was, you know, fairly comfortable. Of course, like always in the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm going to a hotel. However, at the same time, it's like when I was 15 and I was modeling, a lot of these people come in from like Japan or Spain or, you know, all these different areas that weren't locals. And so they would be at the hotel, and our casting calls would be at the hotels. And my parents always went with me, and I never had a bad experience, you know? And so I thought, like, I'll be fine, you know? And so I went in there and I sat in a chair, and he was across from me, and we had a conversation for like an hour. Everything was going really well. It was a great conversation. And then he excused himself to go to the bathroom right as I'm about to leave. You know, he's like, hold on, I'll be right back. He went to go use the restroom, and he comes out, and all he had was a towel. And so at that point, you know, it's like hindsight. I'm like, why didn't I just run out the door? But at the same time, like, the modeling industry is so like dangerous, you know, like there's bad people. These are high level people. And I also like froze, you know, like I didn't know what to do. And that's the worst part. And I still freeze today. My poor daughter, she choked on some string cheese the other day, and I freeze, and my husband's there, you know, and it's like, in traumatic things like that, I just freeze. And I think that it comes from, I never had to worry or watch myself before because I had such a great upbringing. And so when something like this happened, it's like your worst nightmare, and you're thinking like, what do I do next? And my brain was working the whole time, but my body was like frozen. And so then I was raped, and I went home, and that's when Ghislaine, she called me, and she told me that, like, she's like, go look in your purse. And so I went and I looked in my purse, and there was a stack of money with the wrapper around it. It was like 10 grand. And she's like, you've now committed, she told me, a felony. And I'm like, for what? You know? And she's like, well, there's money in your purse. You traded, you know, sexual favors for that. And I'm like, no, I did not come there for that whatsoever, you know? And then it goes into, just like Juliet's story, it goes into, well, your career is going to be over. You're going to end up in jail. What's your family going to think? Your family's going to be in danger. Like, so then, you know, it's like, what do you do at that point? And so I felt really trapped. And I know, like, with working with survivors, like, it's such a common theme. And then we're silent forever. You know, it's like, I didn't even tell my best friend. I went to Hef. I told Hef, and I slightly told Holly enough for her to go to Hef to say, hey, you know, let's have Audra move back into the mansion because she's in a really unsafe situation. And so Hef welcomed me back into the house and let me stay in the main part of the house to be able to keep a closer eye. And I had my German Shepherd that was with me. And so I got to stay in the main house from all of it.
Yeah, you were dealing with extremely calculating, manipulative, evil people. So, you know, everyone totally understands the situation you found yourself in. And, you know, how long did these situations continue with Maxwell and Epstein?
It happened for a couple of years.
And were you transported anywhere else around the country or around the world with them?
Not with them. I was assigned to go and basically be a spy.
Really? Oh, wow. What can you expand on that, please?
So like they always would call me and say, I need to be here, I need to be there. And I would sit and be at parties and I would listen and watch and be kind of the ears for business meetings. I'd be arm candy on people's arms and I'd sit there and listen through dinner meetings and then report back. And like, I didn't really understand what I was in at the time. I know that sounds crazy now, especially like how everything's like come out, but I was so naive. I was 23 years old, you know? And so I'm like, I didn't really understand until I started working with survivors myself. That's when I really started figuring it all out.
So did you understand the nature of what was happening at the time, or is it only with hindsight? For example,
No,
like who they were getting you to...
I don't know why I didn't like figure it out. I guess I just thought it was gossip, you know, like, oh, they want gossip on all these people. I didn't think of it as like, you know, I'm basically spying for these people and feeding information back to them, you know?
So during that 2 years then, were there like ups and downs? Did you have like a low moment that you were like, oh my God, kind of moment?
Yeah, I had a lot. So after that happened, it's such a soul shattering experience that I ended up getting a ton of like physical pain. So like, you know how the children disassociate, and like, I believe because I was, you know, in my mid-20s that I didn't disassociate. I ended up like having where my body remembers. And so I have all this like trapped pain and emotional stuff within. And thankfully, like I feel really free from a lot of it now. I look at it so different that I feel that God put me on this path. I know that sounds crazy, but I remember when I was 9 that I was going to be a Playboy playmate, which is a weird thing for a 9-year-old. But I had found a Playboy and I'm like, they are the most beautiful women I've ever seen. And I didn't even think about like nudity. Right. Oh, I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry.
So we were talking, you're doing great. It's all love and respect in the chat. And we were talking about your ups and downs during those 2 years.
Yeah. So I ended up having like what they call fibromyalgia pain, which I now, with talking to a lot of people, I feel that fibromyalgia is a pain from trauma that a lot of people go through. And so it got so bad that the only time that I could really like leave my house is if I was called for a modeling job or I was called by Maxwell. And like, I really, after seeing Epstein the first time and the rape, I never saw him again. So that was the only time that I ever saw him. I dealt with him on the phone a couple other times when him and Maxwell would be in a fight. And I dealt mainly with Maxwell. And the thing about her, and I know like people, and it may be Stockholm syndrome, right? And I know people may be upset about this, but like after the first initial, like I'm trapped, she actually was a nice person to me. And I know that like, I hate saying that, but like she did show a heart, which is so rare for like traffickers. You know what I mean? Like to hear all the things, because I didn't know at the time that children were involved. I didn't know at the time like how deep this went. I just know like what my experience was. I didn't talk to anybody else. I just know what I was going through, you know? And so anyway, I heard a lot of people say she was so mean, but that wasn't my experience, you know?
So when Juliet Bryant came on, she talked about transhumanism, human cloning, baby farms, stuff like that. Did you ever detect anything like that?
Yeah. So she kept trying to talk to me about selling my eggs, like over and over and over again. And the price kept going up and going up. And I kept saying no. And, like it got so high that at one point, like, to be honest, I did think about it because it was such a huge amount of money. And then I found out all the pain that you go through, like doing that process, and I chickened out. I was like, no, it's not for me. And so I never did give my eggs. But now that I have done all this research and I've really gone into everything, and I have to say, like, coming on after Ike is really, really the biggest nerve-wracking part, I guess, because when I was kind of towards the tail end of all this, I had stumbled upon him and I listened to him, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's the only person that all the stuff that I was hearing at the dinner tables, like, he's talking about, And so, like, I connected right away with all the things that he was saying, and really starting to, like, dig deep into everything. And that led me to my my bloodline. And so I believe that I was targeted for my bloodline, especially dealing with SRA survivors. Like, I understand how big the breeding program is, and that there's different categories for the breeding program. And so I fall in the line of David. And so I'm the Davidic line and Merovingian. And so the cult believes that they descend from Jesus and Mary, which I don't, but we'll get there. So with Jesus and Mary, they say that Jesus survived the cross, and that's why he was gone from the tomb, and that they ran off and they ended up being married and having children, and that line descends from Jesus and Mary. The other theory is that it's Mussolini, who, there was a woman that had relations with a sea serpent. This goes to the mythology, right? But we're talking about the cult here. So, and that she had relations with a sea serpent that gave birth to a girl that was half serpent, half woman. And this gets into the shapeshifters, right? And so it was only on occult dates that she would turn into a sea serpent, and her husband ended up seeing her as a sea serpent, and she went into the sea, never to be seen again. So they say that it could be from that bloodline as well. But knowing how they're so big into it comes from the woman's line, and if it was Jesus and Mary, well, if it came from the mother's line, like, that's Mary Magdalene, like, what importance does she have, So I believe, and I haven't seen anybody else come up with this theory, that it's not either one of those. I think those are to confuse us, because that's what the cult likes to do. I believe that it goes back to actually Mother Mary, because with science now, we have discovered that it goes into the bloodline. So, like, when you're pregnant with a child as a mother, you end up taking on their DNA, you end up taking on their cells, and you have, like, a blood transfer, and that stays with the woman for life. So, like, my daughter is, like, permanently me. So think about Mary carrying Jesus, and she would end up having all that embedded into her bones and her organs and her DNA and her cells. And so when she had other children, they would also get part of that. And I believe that that's why this line is so important, is because of that right there. And that if they want to bring about an antichrist, why wouldn't they want to go with the Messiah's line? Did I lose you?
No, you're fine. Keep going. Just keep going.
They only want, they want to corrupt what's good, right? And they always, like, flip and invert everything. So I believe that they want to go after the Messiah's line to then host that Antichrist spirit.
Yeah, well said. This is absolutely fascinating. I think this is, you know, part of the story that my viewers, you know, are particularly interested in. Just going over it a little bit more slowly then.
Yeah.
Do you remember the range of prices they were offering for your eggs? What it started at, what it finished at, for example?
Yeah, it started at like, I think it was like 30 or 40,000. It was one of the two. And it went all the way up to $1 million.
And, you know, with Virginia, they were trying to like get her to sign legal papers to agree to do that kind of a thing as well. Were they dangling legal papers in front of you or explaining the protocol?
No, I don't think that I ever got that far because I just kept blowing her off, you know, like, oh no, you know, I'm not going to do that. I don't need the money that bad. Like, I'm good. You know?
Did they indicate what they were going to do with the child? Like, did they say, oh, we'll be the parents for the child and the child will have a great life or anything like that?
No, but I do remember, it's like graphic, but when I was about to be raped by Epstein, I looked at his genitalia and I was like, I think that he could see from the look on my face, like it was like horrifying. It was like not normal at all, right? And I remember him saying some comment about like, well, I've had kids. And I'm like, that's weird because you don't have kids, you know? So I always thought that that was like a weird comment during that whole scene. I don't know.
Yeah, I can corroborate that. So we had a clip up from a police interview that Epstein did. And the cop is saying to him about it being egg-shaped, his man part. And yeah, that was you know, it was deformed into like an egg shape. That's what the police said on that's on the record, folks. So yeah, that you know, totally corroborates what you are saying. I'm gonna have to dig that clip out. It was up 5-6 years ago. It got taken down. See if I can find it. But so you know, when someone proposes that much money to you to give up eggs, are you wondering like, if I did this, is it going to end up like Rosemary's Baby, going into some sacrifice thing, or is it going to be with a nice family, that kind of a thing?
Right. Well, I mean, back then I didn't even think that sacrifices were happening. You know, I grew up in the middle of nowhere. I didn't hear about any of that stuff. So, no, I guess I didn't even really give it that much thought to really think through the whole thing. Cause you know, when it got up to $1 million, you know, I did poke around a little bit because I'm like, that's a lot of money, you know? And I think, you know, I didn't have the faith that I mean, I've always been a Christian, but I didn't have the level of faith that I have now. And so I think when you don't have that kind of faith, you do give it a quick thought, like that's $1 million, you know, just for my eggs. Like what does that hurt, you know? And so I did think about it, but I never went through it.